So all our research is sort of applied to these different domains, but we focus on, the foundations of the system design as to how do you model these systems. If I want to model, like, how does a human being, the organs interact with a medical device, or how does, an autonomous vehicle interact with other vehicles or with the environment it is in. Or if I want to look at like buildings and how they are operating in terms of heating and cooling, and how they collectively can cause, large spikes in the electricity consumption, and how do we actually manage that at a grid level, right? Because now tens of thousands of buildings, are suddenly surging with on a very hot day, in terms of the electricity requirements, and how does that manifest itself, in the grid itself, right? So I till for the last 5 years, I also was the program director for the masters in embedded systems, and that allowed us to do a lot of very interesting courses, uh, from autonomous systems buildings, learning and control, and this master's program is now sunsetting this year. This will be the final year, so that we have some new kind of educational efforts in autonomous systems. So we have to kind of close some new things to start, close some old things to start some new things. And so the students from this master's program have gone on to get really awesome jobs, from Tesla to Nvidia to Intel, Lutron, Microsoft HoloLens, and so on, right? And NASA, and so on. So in terms of the research, my research focuses on this area called uh, formal methods, and basically that is, how do you design systems and prove that they can have guarantees of, like, say, safety and performance. And so we focus on life critical systems, right? So life critical systems in the sense that the actions of the system within are so sort of precarious in terms of what they can do if they make a mistake. And so we want to make sure that the systems operate correctly all the time. And mostly they operate on control systems, right? Or systems with dynamics. And these are like aircrafts or automotive systems, or whether it's buildings or even the human body. And a lot of our tools that we develop have machine learning elements as part of them. And so we are not in the business of taking a machine learning algorithm and just applying it to problem A, problem B. What we really use machine learning to do is to actually identify what is a good model of the system, because these are very complex behaviors. Like, a heart, for example. A heart is really, really complex. And even the physicians do not understand how the heart works completely. And so how can we use data-driven ways of actually identifying, well, this patient has this kind of arrhythmia to this extent, and can we guide the physicians to have a better therapy with that particular heart? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And so we apply this, formal methods, which is how do you build and prove systems to be correct, control systems that are complex plants that have dynamics. That means they change over time and how they interact based on the interactions. And we develop data-driven tools, because we use machine learning approaches to then control these systems. And with all of the different areas that we work in, medical devices, autonomous systems, energy system, we ask the same question, right? How can we provide safety and performance guarantees for these closed loop life critical systems? And we'll get to see what we mean by each of these, right? So if you guys have questions, just ask away, and just let me know, right? So, so with medical devices, we actually focus on, how do we, if there is a device that is implanted in you, how do we guarantee the safety and the efficacy of that device, right? So, and we particularly look at devices like implantable cardiac pacemakers that are put inside of your chest, and then the leads basically go inside of your heart in the atrium and the ventricle, and they are basically anchored inside of your heart, like that, right? And so if your heart is beating slow, then it'll speed up your heart. It'll pace your heart. If your heart is beating very fast and erratically, it'll shock your heart, like that, right? So, and so we want to make sure, so far these systems are just like, hey, let's design it, let's do a trial, and then if it works well, then let's launch it. And then after like a year or two after launching it, they're like, oh man, this is not working out too well. Let's recall the device, let's do an update. And so this is like a trial and error kind of approach, broadly speaking. So here we are asking that, look, the software inside of these devices is making these decisions, and the software is deciding now what to do. Should it pace the heart? Should it shock the heart? And when these devices started becoming mainstream in the mid 90s, 10% of all the recalls were software related. And today, actually, even as of 2018, 15% of all medical device recalls are due to software issues. And that's the largest reason for recalls. And the agency that looks at these devices is the Food and Drug Administration, the US FDA. They don't look at a single line of code for these devices because it's just too complex, and they don't. So what they ask manufacturers to do is say, okay, test this device, run it through test 1, test 2, test 3, show us the result of these tests. And these tests are basically saying, this looks like a patient with this kind of a heart problem, a patient with that kind of heart problem, generically speaking, like that, right? And here are some samples, and then we run it through, like, say, 1-200 tests and say, look, it works pretty well. But testing alone is, on just the device is not sufficient. What you really want to see is, well, how does the device now go and now actually have an actuation on the heart? And then there's a closed loop over here, right? The heart now changes the rate, and then the device basically has to then respond to that. So it's an interactive system. So in this sense, what we would really want to do is test the device in a closed loop with the heart. But your heart is different from my heart. Your heart before a morning cup of coffee and after a morning cup of coffee is very different. So what we did back in 2012 was actually we had that was the first batch of CompE students who developed what a system was called a heart on a chip system, and they basically implemented that system for their senior design, and they won the senior design, whatever, the SEAS senior design competition with implementing that system. But they just implemented the hardware. A lot of the math now is under the hood. You won't see much of the math in these slides, but basically it's just to explain to you what we have to do, right? So if you look at the heart, if you want to know how a device interacts with some kind of plant, right? And a plant is just a generic term for, if I have a controller, I want to make sure that the controller can control a system like a plant. And here in our case, the device is the controller and the plant is the heart. And we are trying to make sure that the heart, doesn't beat too fast or too slow. It's just right? And so if it beats too slow, you don't get enough oxygen pumped through your body, and then you could faint. And if it beats too fast and too erratically, you could get a heart attack and you could basically die, right? And so that's a fatal condition. And so there are different types of devices that deal with different kind of, arrhythmias, right? And arrhythmias is just a general term for a irregular heartbeat or derangements in the timing and the morphology of a heartbeat. So let's look at we were like, look, we are electrical engineers, and the physicians that I work with, they are actually electrical engineers, but they are also cardiologists, right? So they are EE cardiologists. And most of them basically have like a EE degree as a bachelor's degree, and then they went and did cardiology. And so they are called cardiac electrophysiologists. And they look at basically how the electricity propagates through the heart, and that causes these contractions. And so essentially at the atrium of the heart, or the top of the heart, you have this action potential, which is essentially now how the cells are now discharging, and they are basically releasing this electric energy, and that's causing the tissue to contract. And so there is this wave now of this discharge, discharge, discharge along this line, along this pathway. And and the frontier basically is causing contractions to happen, and this has to happen in a very rhythmic manner, and that's your heartbeat, right? It's basically pumping blood from the atrium to ventricle, atrium to ventricle, then from the ventricle it's pumping the blood out of the heart, right, into the lungs and across all across the body. And it's doing that, from 60 to, on average like 140 beats per minute. Like when I go to the gym, my heart rate goes up to like 150 beats per minute, and I keep that kind of sustained for some time while I'm doing some cardio, like that, right? So what's the highest heart rate you've seen your hearts go up to? Anyone over here?
Like 210, 215.
215 when you work out?
Yeah, when I'm doing like interval training.
Wow, that's awesome. Anyone else? It's not a competition.
Highest I've ever seen on myself is like 195, 200, also in interval training.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So anything that is above, like say 220, that is treated as a tachycardia. That's a very fast beat, right? And what is your normal resting heart rate like for most of y'all, like for any of y'all?
Like 50, 55.
55. Okay, that's pretty low. That means you're pretty well conditioned, and yeah, not eating too many snacks, not watching too much Netflix, and just working out every day. It's awesome. So so if the heartbeat now goes below something like, below 40 beats per minute, then we call that as bradycardia, right? And essentially that means that these action potentials that are triggering the tissue to contract, they're happening too slow, or they're happening too fast and too erratically. And so this action potential, you can think of it as some kind of timing, right? That means it discharges and then recharges. And so it's basically discharging and going up, and then recharging and then resting, and then it's going up. And so, and it just keeps repeating for the heartbeat, right? And at different locations, but it's conducting along this pipeline. And so we model these sort of, the tissue as nodes and paths over here. And a node is basically just saying this is a tissue region, and now this tissue region is contracting, and but it is causing the next tissue region. It's basically causing this electric conduction to go from a region to the next region to the next region, and causing that sort of wave of contractions to happen. And now, and so when I joined Penn, I did not do any work on heart modeling. And so, but I started visiting the hospital, and I said, hey, what kind of interesting problems do you have here? And the physician is like, well, let's understand how this heart works with these devices, because these devices are, many times they just are almost killing patients instead of saving their lives. So then in about, 3-4 months, I was working with, actually there was an undergrad from Johns Hopkins who came and spent a summer and a semester with me. And then she and one of my grad students, in just less than 3-4 months, they built this tool to actually model the heart in terms of the timing of, how the contractions are happening. And so they built this model, which essentially it's just focusing on what is the timing of a system, right? So it's just a timing only model of the heart. And any kind of arrhythmia can be described in terms of any derangements in the timing, right? So if a beat is a rhythmic beat, that is called a sinus rhythm. And if it is a slow beat, it's a bradycardia. If it's a fast beat, it's a tachycardia. If it's a fast lethal beat, then that can kill you. That's called a ventricular tachycardia. And if it's a fast and irregular atrial beat, that's called atrial flutter or atrial fibrillation. And these are basically described as, is the beat regularly regular or irregularly regular? Is there a repeating pattern of irregularity, or is it just chaos, right? And so right now, a lot of our focus is on this chaotic heartbeat, but this is what we have done in the past. And so essentially what the senior design students did was they took this mathematical model of the heart, of the nodes and paths, and that were described in, like, you can think of it as state machines, but these are state machines with extensions of time, right? And based on time, they get activated, and they activate their neighbors, and they cause this cascading to happen. And they took that and they built they put it in hardware on an FPGA, and they synthesized, the entire heart and the pacemaker, and modeled that in an FPGA. And they realized that on a very small, like an embed style FPGA back in 2012. And they built this pacemaker verification system where you could plug in any medical device and it would automatically run interactive tests based on this virtual heart or in silico heart model, and test it out and tell you where this pacemaker is actually going to, affect the patient inappropriately. And so this is a slide from their senior design, presentation, was let, our heart model catch the bugs before your heart does. So it was a pacemaker verification system. It's saying that, hey, we have a very interactive heart model that can have many different heart conditions. And based on how you pace it through the device, the heart will actually respond to that. And they could find cases where that did not work well, right? So actually, let me do one thing. I don't think that video is over here, but
Did they patent this and sell it?
pardon?
Did they like patent and sell this?
No, they did not patent or sell this, but this was more of like a research project that we open sourced. And so in some sense you can think of it as it was a community sort of thing, right? We shared it with the overall research community, and that led to like a pacemaker challenge project. And it it you can see them. They will describe this. I will just drop in this video, and then you can see what they did with that, right? So let me just see, where is the, here it is.
So this is a pacemaker. A pacemaker is an implanted medical device that regulates the heartbeat, regulates the heart to make sure that it remains happy and healthy. Pacemakers contain 80 to 100,000 lines of code. So we have to test all this code. So how do we test it?
That's where our device comes into play. This is the pacemaker verification system. It consists of a couple of components. One is the virtual heart on a chip, which is FPGA. This heart models the electrophysiology of the nodes and paths that are present in the heart. We can use this to simulate different arrhythmias that a heart like yours or mine could have. We can then interface that heart with an actual pacemaker, and we can see the interactions. We can see how the heart affects the pacemaker, and we can also see how the pacemaker affects the heart in turn. This is a closed-loop system that is unlike simpler testing solutions, where we just give inputs into the pacemaker to see what happens. And this is what differentiates our testing system from older and simpler ones.
Our user interface here allows us to program the heart into various conditions from the simple drop-down menu here. Right now, the heart is programmed to beat normal and healthy. However, when we connect the pacemaker to it right now, we can see that the pacemaker actually causes a problem in this healthy heart. And it is this kind of problem that we want to catch before pacemakers are implanted into real patients. If this were a real patient, this problem could be potentially fatal.
So that is just showing you, like, how we can actually trigger something called a pacemaker mediated tachycardia, and which you can only do with an interactive heart model and not something that is just a test, like an open loop test like that, right? So yeah, so I mean, there's always a question, should you patent this? Should you go and make money with it? And there are many projects that we did that we patented, and that companies are starting to use now, and it was spin-off researches. But in medical devices, we did not want to patent this stuff. First of all, the senior design students took the mathematical models and they basically implemented that to make a platform, right? So it's not like the original research is just it is also with the graduates, research team that is part of it. You can see there are many publications at the bottom of this phase of the research. But the idea is that, how do you go from, you just have the biology, right? And you have the biology, and you can say, well, sometimes the device works well, sometimes it doesn't work well. It works well for some patients, it doesn't work well for some patients. And then the biologist sort of says, well, we did a trial of, 1,000 patients. It costs us so many $1 million to do that trial because we have to implant this device in so many patients. It killed so many patients because doing trials is also, borderline ethical, unethical. And because, you're knowingly putting some risk in a patient, right? But you don't know how much risk is there. And so essentially what we had to do was we said, let's take a step back, right? I mean, we need to be able to model this biology, but across a population of patients, across all variations. And so we had to come up with a non-deterministic model. In order to do that, you have to understand how do you logically model, these reactive systems or these interactive systems. And so there is a whole line of study on how do you formally model systems in terms of logic, and there are languages that can help you model these systems. And we also model the pacemaker, right? And so then we could actually now have a very abstract model of how the heart works in terms of, well, it operates across the range of these rates, across the range of these patterns. And then the device is, well, if it sees too slow a signal, or it sees a signal with a certain pattern, then it starts to, drive the heart. And so this is a very abstract but mathematical model of the heart and of the pacemaker. And it's an over approximation. That means it covers all the type of behaviors that are clinically relevant, but it also has behaviors that may not be clinically relevant. That means they may not be realizable in a human level, right? Or we at least haven't seen it so far. And so you can then run verification approaches that say that for all possible behaviors of the heart, this pacemaker will never actually drive the heart into an unsafe condition, right? So that's a very tough claim because we can't fully model the heart, but we can over approximate that model. And if it's a little vague what that means, that's okay. Okay, don't worry about these are just some formal semantics of how these systems work. What does it mean to over approximate a heart? It just means that, well, a heart can have a range, say from 0 to say 440 or 500 beats per minute. Then we can over approximate to have rates that are from 0 to say 600 beats per minute, but patterns and different types of morphology, the shape of the waves and so on, right? So we can just say, well, it has more behaviors than actually humanly possible. And then what we can do is then we can just say, okay, well, this is a very abstract mathematical model. It's not very useful. It's good for us to verify that this logic that is there in the device will not kill the patient, or we have made sure that it will not. And that's what you can do is you can actually run these kind of checks. And that's why it's called model checking. We are really checking, does this model satisfy a certain property? And the property is don't kill the patient. And how would you kill the patient? If you let the heartbeat go below 30, or if you let the heartbeat go above, say, 250 for an extended period of time, the patient will die, right? So the device should make sure that it does not speed up the heart and it does not let the heart slow down on its own. So it should not have any false positives or false negatives, or minimize that, right? And then we can automatically generate from this very logical model, which is described just as, you can think of it as algebra. From algebra, we basically condense that, and we basically get calculus, right? And we can have say this is an actual curve, or this is one particular heart model of that behaves in this sort of way with these kind of arrhythmias. And this is one realization of a pacemaker in an actual a state flow chart. Basically just means it's like a state machine, right? Of how the logic of the state machine decision making happens, right? And then from that you can press a button and it'll automatically synthesize the code, and then it'll actually generate code for the FPGA, and it'll generate code for a C code that can run on say a microcontroller. And then you can actually test this out now. So you can go from logical verification of very abstract models of these logical models to software testing of really looking at how the software would be implemented in terms of state machines, to actual code. And this is how almost over 70% of the software in cars today, or in aircraft systems today, is generated. It is code generated. That means they have a model and then they just click a button and say, generate the code. They don't sit and type the code. 70% of the code in modern automotive systems is automatically code generated based on a model of the system. So if you have a model of an anti-lock braking system and how the core logic of that should work, or the logic of how an automatic transmission system should work, they model that like in MATLAB and Stateflow and Simulink and those kind of tools, and then they just hit code generate, and it'll generate it for different hardware targets. Like that, right? So we built this kind of end-to-end system to go from verified models to verified code. And so then we started looking at this other kind of device that is called a cardioverter defibrillator, right? And so you've seen a defibrillator in like Scrubs and House and whichever other medical shows are there, Grey's Anatomy, right? And they're basically like putting this on the person's chest and saying stat, and then they try to revive the person, right, by shocking their heart. And that's basically just doing like a full hard reboot of the heart. It's just resetting the heart to try to wake it up again, right? So and so this is a problem that patients that have like ventricular tachycardia, where the beat is really fast, then you can't sort of slow down the heart by pacing it at a slower rate. It's already pacing so fast. And so what you have to do is you basically have to provide a big gigantic jolt of electricity to the heart to just depolarize all the cells, basically discharge all the cells globally, and just say, now you restart again, right? You guys are like totally confused. You're like just tripping over yourselves and you're going to kill yourself. So just going to restart the whole thing, right? So, and so this is done with an implanted device now for people who have this as a chronic condition, right? So of ventricular tachycardia. It's not like they just got hit by, some car and then they are knocked out over there and you want to revive them. This is when they have a chronic condition. And so the device is implanted in the chest, and you can see that the device basically has leads that go into the atrium and into the ventricle. If we were in class, I would have showed you these devices for real, and some of the heart models that we have made. And so now the device essentially provide like a jolt of like 800 volts, or they go up to 61 joules nowadays, and that's basically like a horse kicking you inside of your chest. Inside of this device is a gigantic supercapacitor that is essentially just gets charged up and then releases all this charge. And so essentially this device is constantly monitoring the heart. It's looking at what's the atrial signal, what is the ventricle signal, what is the signal relative to the ground, right? Which is called the shock, or the signal from the can of this device. And if the signal goes, and then it's constantly analyzing the timing of these signals. If it's going too fast, or if the morphology is too, messed up, then it can do that, right? So if you have a normal rhythm, for example, then you should not shock the patient. The device is just sensing and not doing anything. If you have a really lethal fast rhythm, like a ventricular tachycardia, the device can detect that and it should shock the patient and reboot the heart. And if you have a non-lethal fast rhythm that is mostly in the atrium, and that's in the top of the heart, then you shouldn't shock the patient. But if you do shock the patient, that is called an inappropriate shock. That means you should have not shocked the patient, but you shocked the patient, right? So we want to make sure, so these devices, they started rolling out to in the late 90s, and then they started rolling out to millions of patients per year in the early 2000s. And what they saw was that these devices started inappropriately shocking patients quite a bit. So just imagine you put this device in your body and you're like going for a walk with your dog, and suddenly the device mistakes like your heartbeat to be a fast ventricular rhythm, and it shocks you, and you basically get like a kick, like a horse kicking you in your chest every time that happens. And you will not forget that for the rest of your life, right? So back in 2006, there was one company called Guidant, or now it's called Boston Scientific. And essentially they said, look, we are selling this device, which is comparable to Medtronic's device, which is another, defibrillator. And we want to our claim is, from a marketing perspective, that we are 25% more, selective, or have a lower inappropriate shock rate than our competitor. That means our device's algorithms are better in discriminating whether to shock or not shock a patient. And so that was their claim. And then they ran a clinical trial after that from 2006 to 2011 for 5 years. They spent, 10 to $20 million, recruited more than 2,000 patients. And then they were like, okay, let's see what happens here, right? So, but at the end of the day, after 5 years, the results were quite the opposite. They actually found out that this Vitality 2, which is the guidance device or the Boston Scientific device, that's company A, was actually inappropriately shocking the patient 62.2% of the time. That means if you get one shock, you get another one for free, and you really don't want this free shock, right? And the Medtronic was no worse, right? It was also inappropriately shocking patients 46% of the time, inappropriately, right? You would want this number to be really small, actually, right? And so what it showed was that this trial really failed. That company A was saying, hey, we are 25% better, but actually they turned out to be 34% worse than their competitor. And so our question was, hey, can we now use, if we are going to do clinical trials, which is part of the device development process, can we actually now, if it goes from designing the device, this is all the embedded systems, testing, verification, the stuff I showed you before, then they put it in animals, they test it in a few animals, then they do a clinical trial that has to run for many years and, and cost a lot of money and put patients at risk. Then, and over 33% of clinical trials actually fail to meet the desired outcome. So we were like, hey, can't we use, models of, the patient and the devices before we do a real clinical trial, and then inform that clinical trial of, how better to conduct that trial, right? So I'll just give you the short version, but essentially, we work with the US FDA to come up with new methods to speed up clinical trials. And essentially what we did was we modeled the heart, but we also modeled many different arrhythmias. That means we could change the parameters of our models to have different types of fast beat, irregular beats, slow beats, very complex beats. And we generated like a whole population of this. We essentially generated like 11,000 virtual patients, and we fed them into the device models that we had made. And these device models were validated with real devices. So we could sort of show that, well, if a real device does this, then our model will also do the same thing. And our models are basically a good, they mimic the real devices, with high confidence. And then we looked at, well, what is the feeding like these 11,000 patients, signals into these devices, we sort of could then see, well, what is the actual outcome of a virtual trial, right? So this is what we call a computer-aided clinical trial, where we use modeling and simulation to actually evaluate these devices and generate regulatory grade evidence, right? That means evidence that is as good as a real clinical trial. But when you use some models, you have uncertainties. You can question, is your model the right model? Did you conduct the trial in the right way? So we built like a statistical framework to basically, identify and quantify the uncertainties in our model. And but what we could show then was that, where you could have now in the future, you would actually have first a virtual cohort. That means virtual patients that are designed in the way we design our heart models. And you could combine that with a real patient cohort. So instead of, say, recruiting 2,000 patients, now you could replace, say, 200 of the 2,000 patients with 11,000 virtual patients. And that would reduce the size of your trial, reduce the cost of your trial. Because most trials also fail because patients just, drop out of the trial. It's just called patient attrition. And that's the number one reason why trials fail. And so now but what we can do is even more interesting, is that by running our virtual trials, we can actually identify where are our simulation models have high confidence in the results, and where do our simulation models have low confidence in results. And so there's a lot of statistical sort of machinery under the hood, and you don't see any of that here, but essentially it's just saying that, look, I can use my model and give you really good sort of outcomes and confidence for certain types of arrhythmias, but certain other types of arrhythmias we can't model very well. And you need to do that with the real patients. So we can actually advise and guide how the real trial should actually recruit patients. What kind of conditions do these patients have? And so companies really like this because it basically lowers the cost and speeds up a trial and also gives them early insight into the trial. And because they can actually now run these virtual trials before they do a real trial. And if you can basically improve the outcome of your trial, that's, that's basically a big success, right? So also another thing that we do now is we look at other conditions like atrial fibrillation, which is one of the leading causes of cardiac death in terms of electrophysiological problems. And so we look at now, how do we come up with very complex models of the heart, not just these kind of abstract models of the heart, where we can take a heart model from when the physician is working on the patient. And essentially this is not to do with devices, but a patient basically goes into the hospital, the physician goes and scans the heart from inside and basically builds a geometric model of the heart and looks at where is the scar tissue, right? So over here, you can see these purple regions, that's where the scar tissue is, that's where it's blocking the signal. And that causes a lot of really odd and very irregular beats to happen. And as we grow older, a large percent of the population or a relatively large percent of the population gets atrial fibrillation. And that's one of the leading causes of death. So we can now capture these models from the physician's model in the operating room and automatically use this as a computational heart model. That means we can run simulations. And our goal now over the summer is to run these computations in real time while the physician is operating. Because what the physician then has to do is the physician goes and burns the tissue inside of the heart. And you can think of it as, you have like a circuit, like an electric circuit, and that circuit is causing the heart to really beat very fast. And if they burn the tissue and break that circuit, then the heart will go back to a normal rhythm over there, right? So just assume what I said is right for now. But essentially the problem is that they are trying to identify regions that they need to go and burn the tissue to prevent sort of, the kind of illegitimate or irregular percolation of electrical energy that causes a lot of complications in the heartbeat, and so that they can restore the rhythm to be a more normal rhythm. So essentially, when your heart beats, there is the normal beat that comes from the top of the heart, and then it progresses down till the ventricles, and it just goes through that sort of atrium ventricle. In this case, in the atrium, there are many sources of the beat to get activated at the same time, and then it just causes the atrium to just keep fluttering or just to be fibrillating or just vibrating like this and not really pumping. And so essentially your body's not getting the oxygen it needs, and because it's just kind of just vibrating like that, right? It's not going in this pumping sort of, so then once they burn the tissue, they can basically recover the heart to normal conditions, but they don't know where to burn the tissue. And so we basically are building this computational model to guide the physician of where to burn the tissue and how they can quickly restore the heart to normal, right? So, and that's a pretty complex project where we look at, how do we automatically detect where scar tissue is in the actual heart, and how do we tell them where they should go and burn the tissue. So I'll stop at this point for the medical stuff, and there's a lot more. This is just giving you a snapshot of, in class we talk about microcontrollers, but now, this is on the other extreme of like physical systems or physiological control systems. It's very far from, microcontrollers, but at the end of the day, it's still electrical activity inside of your heart. So I was like, hey, if I want to be an electrical engineer, we could work on so many different things, but what really, matters the most, what kind of problems, and, well, let's be an electrical engineer who works on hearts, right? So I'll go to the next problem. If there are any questions, let me know. Let me see if I can see you guys. So far, is this interesting, understandable, vague? Okay. Okay, so we'll look at a very different topic area, which is autonomous systems, right? So so let's see a show of hands. Okay, so Elon Musk this summer, he basically had like a record stock year, right? I mean, of course now Tesla stock went down, but it'll come back up again. But Elon Musk was so thrilled. He said, and Elon Musk is from which university? Yeah, exactly. He's from Penn, right? I mean, and so is our beloved leader, fearless beloved leader, Clorox. What is he called? Captain Clorox, Clorox Commander in Chief. Yeah. So basically, so Elon Musk is giving away, 5 Tesla cars, and so how many of y'all want a Tesla car this summer, right? All of y'all, right? And and I have some footage of Teslas in Switzerland too. So essentially, but you got to drive the Tesla in autopilot, right? Because you guys are engineers, you got to be cutting edge, right? So let's see what it looks like. So this is in Switzerland, and so the car in front just moves away. This is the Tesla, and it just bumps into this van that was parked on the side of the road. No big deal, Let's say. So this is similar in China now. This car again is moving on the side. There's a car on the side of the road, and this Tesla basically scrapes against that car. Even though it could see the car, it just didn't move aside. No big deal, right? It's just a little scratch over there. And then this is another one in China where this Tesla is driving at about 55 miles per hour and then crashes into a street sweeper. It could very clearly see the street sweeper from far away, right? And those of you all that understand Mandarin, basically the family wants to sue Tesla over here. So you can see it's a pretty clear day. I mean, it's fuzzy because there's some smog, and also because, that's how the dash cam is. And so in this case, a 24-year-old died on the spot, right? So back in, I wear, one of the hats I wear is that I serve as the program director for a Department of Transportation Center, which is a $14 million center between Carnegie Mellon and Penn. And we work on a variety of, like automotive and transit projects. And this is the 3rd such center we've had in the last decade. And so one question that we were asking was, what is a driver's license test for driverless vehicles, right? I mean, you got a driver's license, you waited for 2 hours, did a 15-minute test, got a driver's license, and hey, you can drive for the rest of your life, right? For better or for worse, but now you're licensed for life. So what is the equivalent of, the same thing for an autonomous vehicle, right? But autonomous vehicle, you sit in an autonomous vehicle, you just don't know how safe it is, right? So first we have to figure out how do we define safety of these autonomous vehicles. It's very different from defining safety of how safe you are or how safe I am or how safe, 21-year-olds are, like, or 20-year-olds are, right? So we have the demographics of that. People have been 20-year-olds have been driving for a long time, right? When I was 20, there were also other 20-year-olds driving at that time. So we have that historic data. But with an autonomous vehicle, it's making all the decisions, right? When to turn, how to speed up, and should it overtake this other vehicle? And so if you want to say, well, how should what do you guys think? What is when do you think an autonomous vehicle is safe enough? When would you get into an autonomous car and say, hey, just drive me to whatever the next, like to the nightclub, right? Or drive me back from the nightclub because I'm so wasted.
I guess when its reaction time was quicker than what my reaction time could be.
When you're so it could react better than you, but it may not react all the time, right?
Yeah.
And it may react in the wrong way, or maybe reacting all the time, in fact, right? So reaction time could be one. So fine, a machine will react faster than you and me, but you saw in that accident, it failed to react, right? So when would you say it's safe enough? Or what do we mean by safe enough? Come on, I want one answer from each of y'all. Y'all are all going to be sitting in an autonomous car in the next decade. And I just want to make sure that you guys know what you're getting into.
I guess for me, it'd be a statistical thing. If it's statistically safer to get into an autonomous car, then drive one yourself by like a certain margin.
Okay, so my next question to someone else is, how do we get these statistics?
You have to run a
Empirical estimation.
You have to drive a lot. Yeah, and do you know how much you got to drive? Like you got to drive in good weather, in bad weather, in California, in Arkansas, in Pennsylvania, in Beijing, in San Francisco, in Norway, everywhere, right? You got to drive everywhere under different weather, lighting conditions, different road conditions, no lane markings, bad lane markings, snowy conditions, rush hour, crazy Boston driver conditions. So that means you got to drive a lot, right? I mean, so a study was done that said that you've got to drive at least 100 billion miles till you can get a statistically significant answer of how statistically safe, you know, an autonomous vehicle is. So I'm asking you, before you get into a car, how do you know it's safe enough? And then you're telling me, oh, well, you have to drive at least, you know, at least 1,000,000 miles. Okay, 1,000,000 miles is not that much, right? So, I mean, collectively speaking, but here's a chicken and egg problem, right? I mean, in order to basically know how safe something is, you got to release it on the road. Now, is that a good thing to do? So if like now, you know, some new autonomous car company comes and says, hey, in Philly, when you guys come back, you know, next year, say, I didn't say next semester, next year, and then you know, you guys are going to have at least like 300 autonomous taxis driving around. Are you guys okay with that? Because they could be making all sorts of crazy mistakes. Maybe the people in the autonomous car are safer, but the pedestrians are not safer, right? So, because they are basically, it's kind of like what our Clorox commander-in-chief is saying. Let's get back to work, and it's okay if a couple of million people or a couple of people die, but you know, it's good for progress, right? So this is an ethical conundrum, and nobody can answer that clearly because they don't know the full statistics of how many people will die and how well the economy will recover if you start recovering earlier. So that's a problem, right? So what's another way? So we can't do the statistics. So because what happens with the statistics is that suppose I do a software upgrade for the car, then I'm back to mile zero because the driver has changed. I just reprogrammed the driver, right? And what if I change the lens on the camera? That means the eyes of the driver have changed. That means the way the eyes are talking to the brain has changed. And now you go back to mile zero. So even though Tesla has been driving these cars, you know, and other Uber, ATG, and different AV companies have been driving, every time they do a change to the system, they go back, they say they tested. So like, I know the NVIDIA guys, they were like, yeah, we spent a lot of time testing like 10,000 miles. This was like 3-4 years ago. And then we changed the lens of the camera, and then we're back to mile zero. And so you can't do this statistical test. Also, what if you train the car in San Francisco and you drive it in Switzerland? You know, the rules are different. The cars, the lane markings, all of that is different. So the car would be more, you know, safer in San Francisco because it was trained in that. That's its home base, and less safer in Switzerland. But there are, you know, but there are a lot of Teslas in Switzerland now, right? So we're not beating up on Tesla. I just want to say because per se, but Tesla is the only vehicle out there that you can get this kind of footage for, right? It's also Tesla has like gone overdrive in marketing and saying that this is an autopilot system, whereas they still want you to be in charge of the car. So there is this kind of this weird sort of operating environment right now that's saying that you put your hands on the steering wheel, but we'll do the driving for you. And after 12 minutes, everybody's pretty much zoned out, or you want to look at your phone, right? Because you know what's happening on Reddit now is so important, and so you have to catch up, right? There's a lot of FOMO with me now. So now so defining safety itself is very tricky, because if there is an accident, you can say, oh, there's an accident in Beijing, and you'll be like, what do I care, man? I live in Philly. But it's the same driver everywhere, right, is the same bad driver everywhere. So it's a systemic problem, right? It's global. It's like Corona. Corona happened in China, but they're like, hey, it's a Chinese virus, right? Some idiot would say, but no, man, it affects everybody, right? I mean, it affects everybody. So then how are you going to actually battle that, right? So this is similar to that, right? In that sense. So I'll tell you an interesting variation, right? So interesting variation is basically back in 2013, Toyota came to us and they said, look, we know how to make these cars, but the problem is the insurance company told us, look, no autonomous, no, it's a driverless car. So driver is not in charge. Driver doesn't pay the insurance premium. You pay the insurance premium, you as a manufacturer. And so Toyota was like, man, it sucks. We'll be stuck with $1 trillion liability. Then the management came to our lab from Tokyo, and they were like, the more cars we make, the more liability we have. That's a bad business model. So can you help us bound and minimize the risk in the design of these autonomous vehicles before we put them on the road? Or in other words, can you build us a guardian angel? And the guardian angel is essentially saying that, well, you know, it's like a Google search engine for capturing the unsafe driving instances before you put the car on the road, right? Can you search for all the cases where this car is going to fail under different driving conditions? And then we also have other projects on connected autonomous vehicles. This is with the Intel Science and Technology Center, but I'll skip over that. So how does an autonomous vehicle work, right? So we'll look at like this, like all of our systems as sensing, planning, acting, and it's going to go through this loop, right? It's sensing by looking at the RGB camera view, the depth view, how far objects are, like your Kinect, the optical flow view, how fast objects are, object detection, and then semantic segmentation, right? That's really saying what's the drivable surface, what's the sidewalk, who's this motorcyclist, what's a motorcyclist, what's another car, what's a tree, where should I be able to drive? And it puts all of that into the sensing and perception box over here. Then it has to plan out its mission. Right? I mean, it's go to a planner, and the planner is basically saying, how do I go from here to where I want to be, right? So a mission planner is like Google Maps or like Waze that's saying, I want to go from Center City to, you know, Manhattan, it's like just saying, well, get onto I-95 and then you can reach there, right? And the behavioral planner says, well, to get onto I-95, I need to basically get onto this on-ramp. And then I need to overtake this vehicle. I need to take this left turn, this right turn. And so the behavioral planner is making these sort of discrete decisions as the vehicle is driving, and these choices, right? It is really deciding for the vehicle what to do next. And the local planner says, okay, the behavioral planner wants me to take this on-ramp. I can have now this kind of trajectories, and I'm going to pick the best trajectory, and I'm going to basically now, you know, steer and accelerate to follow that trajectory. And so the sense, plan, act loop basically goes on about 100 times a second, and has to keep updating the vehicle and make sure that it actually gets from, you know, the current step to the next step to the next step. The challenge with this kind of a system is that, you know, the vehicle has both, you know, continuous dynamics. That means the vehicle is not like some system that can turn 90 degrees or stop in 0.2 meters. It has its inertia, it has its wheel, full dynamics of the system. And also it has some discrete decisions to make. That means, you know, if it's going on this road, then it has, say, like a simple sort of, like it should be lane follow, lane follow, lane follow. If the vehicle in front is too slow, then it basically overtakes that vehicle and goes into lane change, and then it goes into lane follow again after that. So it's making some discrete choices, when to change lanes, when to take an exit, when to turn, and so on, right? And so, but to model that kind of system is very tricky, because here, you know, you have continuous dynamics and discrete decisions of the vehicles, but you also have other kind of traffic rules, right? Stay within the speed limit, keep a buffer distance. You know, if you want to basically exit from the left lane, then change lanes afterwards, and when to change lanes and so on, right? So we want to incorporate all of these requirements with that, right? So say if you want to have a requirement that if the car slips, then recover within 3 seconds, stay within the lane markers, maintain minimum distance. So these are all requirements in English, and we want this vehicle to follow this, right? And so how do we capture this? So if this vehicle is driving on this road and doing this merge now, then we can see, whoa, that merge is like pretty risky over there, but the vehicle did the merge. But so we can start to model the system, right? And we can come up with a model where, now the vehicle plans to go on this route, and here is the path that we wanted to follow, this red path, right? But what actually happens is that along the way, there is some black ice, right? Or some slickness, and the vehicle can skid over there, but we don't know exactly where that is. We modeled how the other vehicles are, but we didn't model them to be like Boston drivers. Say this is just a Seattle driver, right? Actually, Seattle drivers have also become pretty aggressive nowadays, not like the good old Seattle. But or the actuation in the vehicles could be modeled, but in reality, they turned out to be slower than they actually are. So the real world is always going to depart from some idealistic model that we have. So the vehicle was supposed to follow this path, but it skidded, it recovered as it was supposed to, but it's getting onto the on-ramp with a different angle and a different velocity. Now, is that unsafe because it deviated from what its, behavior should have been, but now is that unsafe? So our problem right now is that we can't think of, safe and unsafe as the only binaries of how do we understand, the risk of a system. What about near accidents? Like this car is trying to make an exit, and this is pretty close to the other car, right? This is what I feel whenever I drive in Philly. They're really, really risky, and they never use their blinkers. And this is even riskier, right? Because it's even closer now over here. And so we want to sort of have a more continuous measure of, safety rather than just safe and unsafe. But that also begs us to refine our questions to say, well, not just saying how does an autonomous vehicle does the autonomous vehicle satisfy its design requirements? Because you can have some design requirements, but the world is always going to deviate from that to say, well, how robustly does it satisfy these requirements, or how well does it satisfy the requirements, given that, the vehicle dynamics, the road, the traffic, the weather conditions are all not going to be ideal all the time, right? So we want to look at this on a spectrum where if I model the world and I can say, hey, I verified the system that for this particular set of conditions and this behavior, the vehicle is going to be safe. But if the conditions change, then I'm basically all bets are off. So that model is very brittle and cannot tolerate much disturbance in the environment or in the operating domain of that vehicle. So we say that model has very low robustness versus an AV that we can design that can tolerate large disturbances, which say like wheel slippage, delayed actuation, aggressive drivers, that has high robustness. That means great. That's going to be safer given even for more, adverse conditions, to a larger range of adverse conditions. So then we say that's high robustness. So we are just quantifying what is safe and unsafe. Let me show you some fun videos now, right? Where people died. Okay, so not so fun, but it's already happened now. So there was this case in 2016 where there was a driver driving in a nice sunny day in Florida, and essentially he was coming down this highway. Here it is. So he's coming down this highway over here. It was an arterial road, and there was a truck turning over here, right? And so the car was driving in Tesla autopilot mode back in 2016 summer, and it saw basically a big white box, and it said, hey, I don't know what this big white box is. I'm just going to drive through it. So the car basically went through under the truck, and the top got cut off. And the driver, who at that time was just watching Harry Potter on his iPad, he died on the spot. And then the car continued to go off the road in autopilot mode, broke through a fence, and then it hit a power pole, and it kept driving till basically the front axle broke off and the car couldn't drive anymore. And so that was an example of, how, the car basically couldn't, it killed the driver and it continued going on. So then we were like, okay, let's look at how these incidences look from the perspective of the car. So we started with obviously Grand Theft Auto. All great projects have to start with GTA. And but here we could actually change the weather conditions, the lighting conditions, and so we had like full access to the entire universe that this vehicle was, the dynamics of the vehicle, how slippery the roads were. The only thing I couldn't do was put this car under the truck. But the point was not to recreate that, but really to say, can we use some virtual world like this to actually now capture, how the car sees the world for real, like an AV. And that's what we could capture. Like, so from the GPU depth buffer, we could capture like a LiDAR-like point cloud map over here of how the car sees the world. And we could actually see how all the objects that the car is seeing while it is driving down the highway. In fact, we could get this perspective of a LiDAR perspective, of a laser rangefinder perspective, or a laser scanner that is used in most autonomous vehicles from any perspective. And we could actually use all of these as virtual sensors, right? Getting depth views, getting RGB views. In fact, we could install as many cameras on our virtual cars in these game engines, and now take in all of these camera feeds, and then in real time basically do exactly what I showed you before with the perception aspect. And then we could like run model predictive controllers over here. We could do semantic localization and mapping all in real time. This is basically the perception planning control pipeline that is in an autonomous vehicle, and we can do this on the the autonomous vehicles. So then we started to build this Guardian Angel system, which is basically just a search engine to say, well, where are the unsafe driving conditions? Say this turn is a really sharp turn, and we can automatically now drive through tens of thousands of miles of within these virtual worlds and identify when the vehicle basically reaches an unsafe condition. So, and a lot of these vehicles have like end-to-end learning elements. That means they take like say an image, and based on the image, they decide what is the steering angle and acceleration, and then they go to the next image, the next image, the next image. And so we can even test these kind of systems. And so then we basically drove through tens of thousands of miles in these virtual environments to then capture, and automatically the search engine would return us cases where say the vehicle now is losing tracking, right? It is going off-road over here, and it returns this kind of example and says, okay, here the vehicle is losing tracking, and now the vehicle has really gone bonkers. And why does that happen? Why did it lose tracking? Then we can go and investigate that. Here, of course, we can crash as many times as we want before a real vehicle crashes, because all it ends up is in a blue screen, right? So, but in reality, you want to make sure that you capture these cases before. Now you might say, oh, well, that's just a made up example. So this is what happened in November of 2018. This is a Tesla driving on a similar style highway, oversteers, and then it goes and crashes over there on the side. I'm not saying it's the same case, but I'm just saying that these kind of accidents are still, still there, right? So, and you don't want to be part of that, essentially, right? So what we then built was essentially a system where you could plug in any, third party or any commercial sort of perception planning control system into our testing system, right? Which was called a autonomous vehicle computer aided design toolchain, AVCAD toolchain. And where we have any type of virtual world. Here you can have, GTA, or you can have Carla, or any kind of AV driving simulator. And we control the environment, right? And so what we are doing over here is looking at a T-junction, and under what conditions does this vehicle, have a near accident or an accident at a T-junction, for example. So we can have different driving scenarios, merges, highways, off-ramps, different settings for the start of the scenario, how fast the other vehicles are driving, the weather conditions. And then most importantly, right at the bottom here is we have these safety specifications. That's saying that when does the car get, have a time to collision that is very small, or when does the car basically, go off-road, or when does the car crash into another vehicle, and so on, right? So we can specify all of that. All of this is done in logic and in math now. And automatically, this is called a gradient descent search. And it is automatically doing a very sharp, smart search across weather conditions, across vehicle dynamics, across interactions with the other agents, and searching for cases very quickly where the vehicle is going to basically not perform well or have very low robustness. And so if you analyze, I'll just spend 5 more minutes and finish up this part. And so there was a study done of over 6 million accidents and near accidents in the early 2000s. And they found that more than 99% of these crashes could be binned into just 37 driving scenarios. So we said, hey, why don't we actually go and model these driving scenarios like merges, curved roads, overtakes, And so we started to model these in different ways. Um, and then you could and then we could go and analyze all of these cases over here, right? So as these vehicles are driving, and then we could parametrically also vary how the other agents behave, what are their placements, the curvature of the road, and we could look at all variations of the same kind of scenario, and whether lanes are narrower, they're wider, they're curvier, or they're steeper, and so on. And then we could search for, and so we ran the search engine across all of these different cases like that, right? So here's an example of a vehicle trying to do an exit, and then it basically skids out of control. Now, this is not something we manually designed. This is something that is returned by the search engine as a counter example visualization. It's basically saying, here is a problem, and we're going to visualize it for you, and so that you can give feedback directly to the Toyota engineers as to this is where that vehicle is going to make a bad choice. And so we can go and analyze, why did this vehicle do that? It was going on a highway, and then it basically switched from the highway speed controller to the exit speed controller a little too late. So it was going in too hot. But the vehicle has all these rules: don't crash into the other vehicle, don't go on the shoulder of the road. And it also has dynamics. That means when it jams its brakes really hard, it starts to lose traction and starts to skid. So you see the models are pretty complex, and we capture all of that. And in this case, it allows us to basically pinpoint. It's kind of like, think of it as debugging, right? We are debugging a really complex system over here, but it has dynamics, it has weather, it has sensing, perception, planning. So it's not just a piece of code that is running in, your gemulator, or it's code that is running, but it also has a lot of real world effects over it. So basically our testing system returns us like this list of robustness for different runs. And any run that is very negative, you can click on it and it'll procedurally generate a counter example visualization. And the Toyota guys were like, wow, that's great, because now we can actually communicate this, and there's no English to Japanese barrier of communication, because our engineers can actually just see where the vehicles are screwing up, and they can go and fix that problem. So and then they can actually now put that into more high fidelity simulators, more than the Unity toy like simulators, and test out, like, say this is a local planner looking ahead 100 milliseconds at a time. And then we rented out a road in Nagoya in Japan to then test out this local planner. And so you can see that, first you do simulation based testing, then you do this guardian angel stuff to search for cases where it does not work well. You fix those cases, put it into higher fidelity simulators with better physics models, and then you do this real world testing in a limited way. And then you basically gradually build up more confidence as you're making your system. And this is like a more structured way, right? I'll skip over all this logic and math at this point. Looks like PowerPoint also crashed over there, talking about crashing. So so I'll just end in 2 minutes, and then we can have some more questions over there. I'll just restart PowerPoint, and then we can get back to. Okay, let me just share this screen again. Okay, you guys can see the screen, right? Okay, so then we started to look at, like, let's say, why do we make artificial, driving cases? We started looking at real traffic, and from real traffic cameras, we could extract the behavior of these traffics with different machine learning approaches. And then we could actually train our own vehicles to behave just like those vehicles. And we use an approach called generative adversarial imitation learning. And that's basically saying, I see you for some time, and I can behave just like you, right? And so, but we are capturing the full distribution of the behavior. And then we can create that in our own simulator, right? This top picture over here is a real driving scenario in I-80, and this is the rendered image. But now we can actually, when we simulate it, we can actually simulate it at the tails of the distribution, where the vehicles are more aggressive. So this is really looking at the distributions of features of how the vehicles are changing lanes, how close they're coming, how fast they're accelerating over 3 hours of the video. And so we could basically now simulate at the tails of the distribution to speed up basically the search for rare events when these vehicles are very aggressive. And then we could actually capture accidents much more effectively now, but they're based on naturalistic driving behavior and the distributions of real driving behavior, not some artificial sort of thing, right? So we're basically saying, I look at the real world, I capture the statistics of the driving of the real world, and then I can simulate that, but I say use the simulator to simulate only the worst behavior or the most aggressive behavior, and that allows me to basically search for rare events like an accident or a near accident, rather than waiting for, a death happens on average in the US every 160 million miles, right, of driving. And we don't want to basically be simulating 160 million, miles every time, to capture like a bad accident like that, right? So essentially, like in the medical stuff, we use models. In the automotive stuff, we use a lot of models, and we know that these models are never going to represent reality, right? We can't capture the full complexity of each person's heart and every cell of the heart, and how the heart changes over time, or how the environment affects a LiDAR, and how the LiDAR affects the perception algorithms, and how the perception algorithms affect the planning, that affect the control, that affect the safety of the system. So we can't model all of that, but we essentially want to find good enough models that can give us, confidence in terms of, and we need to trust the models to that extent, like that, right? So we also have a Toyota Prius that is sitting in the Pennovation Center, and we fly our drones in the Pennovation Center. In fact, I have a second lab in the Pennovation Center, at the entrance of the Pennovation Center. It's called our IoT lab. And whoever's interested in doing research, once the campus opens up, that's a great place to like really do undergrad research. We organize some trucking workshops. Now I even have like some projects on smart trucks. That's really exciting. Anyone who's interested in computer vision and perception and machine learning, there are some really awesome projects. In fact, before this class, we had a group meeting on, the next generation trucks project. We also have autonomous racing cars. You guys may have heard me mention this before. All of this is on the F110 webpage. And these are, self-driving cars. They are 1/10 the scale, but 10 times the fun. And they have LiDARs. In fact, this semester and last semester, I was also teaching the F110 course, and it is a really, really awesome course. But you need some good background before you can take the course, and you can see the prerequisites. It won't be offered next semester. I'm basically taking like a teaching leave for next semester because I taught too many extra classes. But we teach you how to build, drive, and race these cars, and it's really, really fun. There's a lot of very exciting stuff, and there are many, many research partners, over 36 US universities that are part of this, and over 60 universities internationally that are part of this. And we have many races along the way. And yeah, like this is an example of a race. So I'll just end at this point, and you can just watch like, what happens in a race. But essentially, any questions you guys have? So I can answer questions while we watch this video. I'll just lower the volume. So these are all our, like, different people come from all over the world to race these cars, right? And they build the same car, the same design that we share on the F110 website, and then we are racing them all together. So essentially, it's a battle of algorithms, and we coach them on how to build these cars, how to race them, and then it's really like very exciting because it's very cutting edge in the sense it's as good as driving a real car or programming a car to drive itself, because it uses like LiDARs, depth cameras, different types of sensors, but it's all running on a GPU system. So it's definitely a magnitude difference from ESE350 in terms of how, the kind of the level of software and algorithms that are involved in the course, right? And so, and here you can see how these cars are, how fast they go, right? They can go to a peak speed of 50 miles per hour, but we have not reached that speed in autonomous driving yet. and there's a really nice team that works with that, right? We also work on drone networks and drone fleets, and that's another project called Fly by Logic, and I'll skip over all of that. And then we work on buildings and energy, and I'll skip over all of that, but I'll just stop at this point. So any questions that you have? Maybe I'll play this video while we...
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the ETH also partake in this F-110 project?
ETH had a team. Yeah, that's true. So ETH had a team. In fact, I think one of the teams that was in the video was from ETH. And you can definitely race as part of that. You can, there are a couple of ETH professors that you can talk to. And I think there's Rafael, DeAndre, and a bunch of them. Yeah, all the controls guys, right? They would love to do this. In fact, if you go to f110th.org, here, I'll pull up let me just change the sharing to my desktop. And then, so if you go to f110th.org, then you'll see that the whole website is updated now. And yeah, okay, so let's see this once this website loads. But essentially, I just have too many tabs, so it's going to take some time. But essentially now, with the F110 website, basically will help you essentially look at, will help you build the car from scratch, and then it'll help you program the car, and there's all the code is online. In fact, it's very sophisticated in the sense that it runs on OpenAI Gym. In fact, there are a couple of undergrads in our team. Matt Lieberman from our class, he's part of the crew of F110. Also, there's Dhruv Karthik, who's a junior. He in fact wrote, he just got a journal paper published in the Proceedings of Machine Learning Research, which is one of the most elite, machine learning journals out there, right? I mean, he can get into any grad school he wants right now, because he's right at that level now, right? As a junior, right? And then he's so there are quite a few undergrads involved, a lot of master students. So in the build page, I'll just spend 2 more minutes. If people want to drop off, you can drop off. But and then you can look at this website on your own also. So the build page essentially will show you, how to build this car from scratch, like that, right? And then, at Penn we already have many cars because we teach the course, and many universities are starting to teach the course. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was bringing up a Technical University of Vienna to teach the course. We have folks from TU Munich that are teaching the course, from Korea, Czech Republic, a lot of that, right? So anyway, right now, I think it's just my Chrome is really slow because I have like hundreds of tabs open. But essentially, it can start from building the car to how do you actually program the GPU system, to getting the sensors to work, and all of that, right? So you can see all of that over here. There are like hundreds of pages of different. So there are like, it guides you through the lower chassis, upper chassis, the middle level chassis. How do you put it all together? It only takes like an hour or so to put the car together, program the motor controllers, and so on, right? And then how do you go to installing the firmware to basically to actually getting the car to drive. And so within 3 hours, the car is basically driving, and you're done with basically the physical stuff of the car. And after that, you go to learn, right? And then in learn, that basically gets you to say, okay, well, how it's all about algorithms now, perception algorithms, planning algorithms, control algorithms. And so the learn essentially will help you, get your vehicle started and driving. And then we have a lot of races, right? I mean, how do you, and every year we have, different Grand Prix. In fact, this year we were going to have 3 Grand Prix but we'll have only one in Vegas in October as part of the International Robotics Conference. But we have a full course, and all these lecture slides are really like detailed. In fact, this reactive method called Follow the Gap, this lecture was made by an undergrad who was part of our team. And see, his name is Dhruv Karthik and the F110's team. And he did this as part of his ESE350 project back in, and Hanming also did F110 as part of his 350 project. They like really awesome project for their 350 thing. And that was a really hardcore project using the LiDAR and actually autonomously driving the vehicle through a very cluttered obstacle course, and with people jumping in front of the car and so on. And so then all these lectures are in detail, right? How do you have the car driving, and and then there are videos in the lectures, and you can watch all of that. And then and then racing, right? And then we race at Penn. It's kind of like your Penn electric, but this is Penn, autonomous. And so the next race will be in October in Vegas, because we've canceled all the other races. But we were in Berlin. We were to be in Berlin in July. October of last year, we were in New York, and then in Montreal, Canada, in Torino, Italy, Portugal, Pittsburgh. And so basically you get to travel all over the world also as part of that. And then you can see the crew. There's a lot of, people who are, from all over now as part of that, right? So, and many of them have become professors, and many of them are still active grad students over here. They're all Penn people over here, right? And this are mostly Penn people. And then we have partners in Europe, and a lot of alumni. They're all like in Amazon Robotics, GPU, at NVIDIA. So Jack Harkins was a former ESE350 TA. Parul Jain is basically the senior motion planning engineer at Tesla. He was responsible for the Tesla Summon thing. Chris Carr was recently at Built Robotics, a construction robotics. Honda Autonomous. Rivian is an electric vehicle. Here's Matt. You guys know this guy. Okay, he's our tire changer. Basically, he does whatever project that he gets his hands on, right? But I think that's a great way to become an engineer, right? So this guy went to some guys went to drone racing league and to different companies like that, right? So I'll stop over here and I'll let you guys, if you have any questions, ask away. And if you want to talk one-on-one, I'll stay online for a few more minutes, and then you can just message me privately, and then we can talk one-on-one. But let's stop the lecture here, and then I can take any questions. Okay, all good?
Thank you for the course.
Okay, most welcome, most welcome. And on Wednesday, on Thursday is just, if you have questions, mostly people are just like, should I do pass fail? Should I do pass fail? And yeah, do pass fail if you want to do pass fail. Whatever makes you feel less stressed out. Don't worry about it that much, right? I mean, at the end of the day, well, you guys, I already spoken to you about pass fail, but the world is not going to see you very critically, because this is like a hopefully once in a lifetime kind of experience. And most of us are pretty comfortable, thankfully, and if you're not in a comfortable situation, then, pass fail is not a bad option. So just don't stress out. Yeah. So, okay, if you want to talk one-on-one, just message me on the chat channel and I'll stick around. And then we could just have a private chat over there, right? So,
Thanks.
okay, all right. So guys, have a good time now, and then if you want me to talk about more research stuff on Thursday, I can do that too. just let me know, right? I mean, there's a lot of research that we do. It's just not put on our websites as well. So on drones, on machine learning and control stuff, and there's many different topics out there. But I'll stop here. Okay. All right. Have a nice afternoon. Get some coffee. Bye.
Thanks, Rahul.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.